Let me ask you something. You're out there, it's January. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe. You're staring at your rod tip, willing it to move. Nothing. Not a twitch. And you start running through the checklist in your head. Is it the bait? The location? The weather pressure? But I bet there's one thing you're absolutely certain about. Your line. You've got that super thin, almost invisible 0.08 millimeter line on, just like the old-timers always said. Thinner is better in winter. But what if I told you that this one piece of unbreakable advice is the exact reason you're not catching fish? In this video, we're going to expose the great lie of winter line thickness. And I promise, what you learn today might just make you go home and change every single spool you own. So, let me ask again. Are you sure you're using the right line, or are you just following a rule that doesn't work? For as long as any of us have been ice fishing, the mantra has been pounded into our heads. In winter, fish are sluggish, wary, and the water is clear. Therefore, you must use the thinnest, most invisible line possible to avoid spooking them. It makes perfect sense on the surface, right? A thinner line offers a more natural presentation for tiny jigs and is less visible to a cautious perch or walleye. This idea has become so ingrained in fishing culture that it's almost gospel. You'll see guys at the tackle shop arguing over the difference between a 0.1 and a 0.08 line as if it's the only thing that matters. We've all been conditioned to believe that thin equals finesse, and finesse equals winter success. But we've been doing this for years without ever stopping to ask, does this logic hold up in the brutal, real-world conditions of a frozen lake in the middle of January? Let's start with the most obvious problem that everyone ignores. Picture this. It's 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside. You pull your line off the reel. That ultra-thin, high-tech fluorocarbon now has the memory of an elephant. It comes off the spool in tight, stiff coils. You can try to stretch it, you can run it through your fingers, but in that biting cold, it wants to stay coiled. Now, you tie on your tiny 2-gram tungsten jig. What happens when you drop it in the hole? That jig doesn't have enough weight to pull those coils straight. Instead of a smooth, natural drop, your lure just hangs there, connected to a slinky. A fish sees that unnatural mess and is gone. Your presentation is ruined before the bait even reaches the bottom. That's problem number one with the thinner is better myth. Now let's talk about the feel. The whole point of a sensitive setup is to feel that subtle winter bite, which can be as light as a slight tick or just a feeling of weightlessness. But when your line is a frozen, coily mess between your rod tip and the lure, that sensitivity is completely deadened. The coils act like a spring, absorbing all the subtle information coming from your jig. A perch could inhale and spit out your lure, and you would never even know it. You're sitting up there, completely blind to what's happening 50 feet below. A slightly thicker, softer monofilament or a high-quality winter line, even at a 0.12 millimeter diameter, will often have less memory in the cold. It will maintain a straighter connection to your lure, transmitting every single bump and tap directly to your hand. You're trading a tiny bit of visibility for a massive gain in crucial bite detection. Okay, so what about the invisible argument? This is the big one. We're told that a 0.08 line is practically invisible, while a 0.12 is like a rope to a fish. Let's think about this critically. We're often fishing in 15, 20, even 30 feet of water in January. Down there, it's dark. Light penetration is minimal, especially with a layer of ice and snow on top. Do you really believe a fish, whose metabolism is slowed to a crawl, is carefully inspecting the difference of 0.04 of a millimeter in a dark, cold environment? The truth is, lure action and scent are far more important triggers than the microscopic difference in line diameter. I've seen it time and time again. A perfectly presented bait on a slightly thicker line will outfish a poorly presented one on an invisible line every single day of the week. Let's move on to a practical scenario. Your fishing spot. You're not always fishing over a clean, sandy bottom. More often than not, you're near structure. You're fishing near submerged weeds, rocks, or a wooden crib where the fish are hiding. Now imagine you hook into a decent 2-pound perch next to that structure. You're using that spiderweb thin line. The fish makes one run and scrapes that line against a single sharp edge of a rock or a zebra mussel. Ping! It's gone. That's the heartbreaking reality of using a line that has almost zero abrasion resistance. By stepping up to a 0.12 or even a 0.14 line, you are giving yourself a fighting chance. That small increase in diameter provides a significant increase in toughness, allowing you to guide that fish away from snags and actually get it onto the ice. Another huge factor is knot strength. This is something we rarely discuss when we're obsessing over line diameter. Tying a good knot in a hair-thin line with cold, numb fingers is a challenge in itself. But more importantly, the knot efficiency, the percentage of the line's stated strength that the knot actually holds, is significantly lower on these ultra-thin lines. A poorly tied or cinched knot on a 0.08 line might only hold 50% of its breaking strain. So that 2-pound test line is now effectively a 1-pound test line. A slightly thicker line is more forgiving. It's easier to tie a solid Palomar or uni knot, and that knot will retain a much higher percentage of the line's actual strength, giving you the power you need when it matters most. Let's bring in another angler. Imagine you're out there, and an old-timer comes over to see how you're doing. He looks at your setup and says, "Son, that line's too thick. You'll never catch anything on that." It's a classic moment. But then you proceed to pull up 3 nice perch while his superfine rig sits motionless. Why? Because you're fishing with a heavier jig to get down deep, and your slightly thicker line gives you a more direct connection to it. You can impart a sharp, crisp jigging action that attracts fish from a distance. His ultra-thin line, on the other hand, creates a bowing or stretching effect with his heavier lure. His jigging motion is mushy and vague. The fish aren't interested. You're not catching fish in spite of your thicker line. You're catching them because of it. Now, let's consider the target species. This idea of one thin line fits all for winter is completely flawed. If you are fishing for small, finicky roach or bluegill in shallow, clear water, then yes, a case can be made for a 0.08 or 0.1 line. The presentation for tiny baits is key, but what if the target is a big, aggressive perch, a crappie, or even a walleye that decided to show up? Hooking a 3-pound walleye on a 2-pound test line is a recipe for disaster. You need to match your line to your potential target, not just to the season. Using a slightly thicker line, like a 0.14, is a smart insurance policy. It allows you to confidently land that unexpected bonus fish instead of just having a story about the one that got away. Let's talk about the hook set. In winter, with a sluggish fish, you need a solid, penetrating hook set. With an ultra-thin line, especially one with a bit of stretch, much of the energy from your hook set is absorbed by the line itself. It's like trying to pull a car with a rubber band. You lift the rod, but the hook point just barely pricks the fish's mouth. The fish shakes its head once, and the hook pops out. A line with a slightly larger diameter, particularly a quality fluorocarbon, has less stretch and more backbone. When you set the hook, that energy is transferred directly to the hook point, driving it home. It's the difference between actually hooking the fish and just momentarily startling it. Think about the ice itself. The edge of the hole you drilled is one of the most dangerous places for your fishing line. It's often sharp and jagged. As you fight a fish, your line is constantly rubbing against that edge. A super thin line can be frayed and weakened in a matter of seconds. I've personally lost good fish right at the hole for this very reason. It's the final and most painful moment of failure. A line that is just a couple hundredths of a millimeter thicker can withstand that abrasion for much longer, giving you the precious extra seconds you need to guide the fish's head up and out of the water. Don't let the final step of the fight be your downfall because you chose a line that couldn't handle the battle. Let's bust another part of this myth: lure action. The argument is that a thinner line allows a tiny jig to have more freedom of movement, a more natural flutter. This is true, but only up to a point. It's a game of diminishing returns. The difference in action on a 2-gram jig between a 0.1 and a 0.12 line is practically negligible, especially when you factor in the negative effects of line memory and coiling we discussed earlier. What good is a theoretical improvement in lure flutter if the line is a coiled mess and you can't feel the bite anyway? You are sacrificing real-world performance for a tiny, often unnoticeable theoretical advantage. It's a bad trade-off. Now, let's inject some confidence into the equation. Fishing is as much a mental game as it is a physical one. When you are constantly worried about your line breaking, you fish differently. You're hesitant, you don't give the hook set the power it needs. You baby the fish during the fight, giving it more opportunities to throw the hook. When you have a line you can trust, you fish with more confidence. You can be more aggressive with your jigging, You can set the hook with authority and you can control the fight. This confidence translates directly into more fish landed. Sometimes the best piece of equipment you can have is the one that removes doubt from your mind. Think about deep water situations. In January, fish often move to deeper basins, let's say 35 or 40 feet. Getting a tiny jig down that deep on a gossamer thin line takes forever. And worse, any slight underwater current will create a massive bow in that line. Your jig will be yards away from where you think it is. You will have virtually zero bite detection and no control. In this scenario, switching to a thicker line, say a 0.14, and a heavier jig is not just an option, it's a necessity. The thicker line cuts through the water better, minimizes the bow from current, and allows you to maintain a direct, sensitive connection to your lure, even at significant depths. The thin line rule completely falls apart in deep water. Let's consider the line material itself. We often just talk about diameter, but the material is just as important. A high-quality, soft monofilament at 0.12 millimeters can be a much better choice in extreme cold than a cheap, stiff fluorocarbon at 0.1. The mono will stay more limp and manageable, providing better presentation. It also has a bit of stretch, which can act as a shock absorber when a big fish makes a sudden run, preventing the hook from tearing out. It's not about just grabbing the thinnest line on the shelf. It's about choosing the right material with the right properties for the specific conditions you're facing on that day. The answer is more nuanced than just a single number. There's also the element of line twist. Lures, especially small spoons and jigs, can spin as they fall or are retrieved. Ultra-thin lines are incredibly susceptible to line twist. After a few hours of fishing, your line can become a twisted, weakened mess that's prone to tangling and breaking. A slightly thicker line is more resistant to this twisting. It has more body to it, which helps prevent those frustrating tangles and maintains the integrity of your setup throughout the day. This means less time retying and more time with your bait in the water, which is always the goal. Let's talk about a real-life experiment. A few seasons back, I was convinced thinner was better. I was on a lake, fishing side by side with a friend. I had my 0.08 fluorocarbon rig. He had a 0.12 monofilament. We were using the exact same jigs, the exact same bait. The conditions were tough, bites were few and far between, but he was consistently hooking up while I wasn't feeling a thing. I was getting frustrated. I finally asked to feel his rod, and the difference was night and day. I could feel every single pebble on the bottom. The connection was direct and crisp. My own setup felt numb and disconnected in comparison. He wasn't getting more bites, he was just detecting and converting the bites we were both getting. That experience forced me to rethink everything. I realized I had been so focused on the fish's vision that I completely ignored my own sense of touch. The purpose of a fishing rod and line is to extend your nervous system down to the lure. If that connection is broken or muffled by a coily, unmanageable line, you are essentially fishing blind. The tiny theoretical advantage of invisibility is rendered completely useless if you can't tell when you're getting a bite. The primary function of your setup is bite detection. Everything else is secondary. And sometimes a slightly thicker line performs that primary function much, much better. So, when should you use that ultra-thin line? There is a time and a place. If you are in a sight fishing situation, in a clear, shallow bay, and you can literally see the fish approach and inspect your lure, then yes, going as thin as possible makes sense. In this specific controlled environment, visibility is the paramount concern. But let's be honest, how often are we in that perfect situation? 99% of the time, we're fishing deeper, in lower visibility, and dealing with cold, wind, and other variables. Our line choice should be based on the reality of our fishing, not on a perfect laboratory-like scenario. The modern fishing industry also plays a role in this myth. They market these ultra-thin lines as the pinnacle of technology. We see the microscopic diameters on the package, and we're conditioned to believe that a smaller number equals a better product. It's an easy selling point, but they don't market the downsides, the poor knot strength, the terrible memory in the cold, the lack of abrasion resistance. They sell us the theory, but we're the ones who have to deal with the practical failures on the ice. We need to be smarter consumers and anglers, and choose our gear based on performance, not just marketing hype. Let's put this into a simple rule of thumb. Start your January season with a quality all-around line, maybe a 0.12 millimeter copolymer or monofilament. This is your workhorse. It offers a great balance of strength, manageability, and sensitivity. If you find yourself in a situation with extremely finicky fish in super clear, shallow water, then you can downsize. But don't make the ultra-thin line your default. Make it the specialist tool you bring out only when absolutely necessary. For most January fishing, a slightly thicker, more reliable line will serve you far better and put more fish on the ice. It's about using the right tool for the job. Ultimately, this is about breaking free from dogma. For too long, we've just accepted the thinner is better rule without questioning it. We've blamed ourselves, our bait, or our luck when the real culprit was right there on our spool. The biggest discovery you can make in fishing is often when you dare to defy conventional wisdom and experiment for yourself. Spool one of your rods with a slightly thicker line this winter. Fish it side by side with your old setup. Pay attention to the feel, the control, and the number of landed fish. I'm willing to bet you'll be surprised. The fish don't read the forums or the magazines. They just react to a good presentation, and a thicker line can often deliver that presentation more effectively. So let's bring it all together. For decades, we've been told a simple but incomplete story, that January's cold water and wary fish demand the thinnest fishing line possible. We've obsessed over hundredths of a millimeter, believing it was the key to success. But today, we've pulled back the curtain. The real eureka moment is realizing that in the harsh reality of ice fishing, the practical disadvantages of ultra-thin line, the horrible memory, the poor knot strength, the lack of abrasion resistance, and the deadened sensitivity far outweigh the theoretical advantage of being slightly less visible. The most shocking truth is that your finesse setup might be the clumsiest, most disconnected tool you own. Switching to a slightly thicker, more manageable line isn't a compromise. It's a strategic upgrade. It gives you better bite detection, more confidence, and a better chance of landing the fish you actually hook. This isn't about abandoning finesse, it's about redefining it. True finesse is about control, and you simply have more control with a line you can trust. Thank you so much for watching. If this video challenged your thinking, hit that like button and subscribe for more tips that break the old rules. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the biggest unbreakable fishing rule that you've broken and had massive success with?